The morning sun spilled over the quiet cul-de-sac, bathing everything in soft gold. My little blue front door gleamed in the light, a color I had chosen carefully, one that made me smile every time I came home. To me, it wasn't just paint. It was a symbol. The door had been plain white when we first moved in, bland and unremarkable, blending in with every other house in the neighborhood. But after years of struggle, financial hardship, losing my job, nearly losing our home, I finally painted it blue as a sign of fresh beginnings. Blue was calm, strong, hopeful. It felt like us. It felt like home. But apparently, the HOA didn't see it that way. The letter came on a Tuesday, folded neatly into a stark white envelope. The kind of envelope that made your stomach tighten the moment you saw it. Bold black letters spelled out, "Notice of violation." I tore it open, eyes scanning quickly, and then froze. Your property is in violation of community aesthetic standards. The color of your front door does not comply with HOA-approved colors. You are hereby fined $500 and must repaint your door within 14 days. I laughed at first, because surely this was a mistake. A joke, maybe. But then reality sank in. They were serious. My door, was apparently so offensive to the HOA that it demanded half a month's mortgage payment in fines. I showed the letter to my husband, his brow furrowing as he read. "They can't be serious," he muttered. "It's a door." "It's our door," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. The more I thought about it, the more my chest tightened. This wasn't about paint. This was about control. The HOA didn't care about blue versus white, they cared about power, about making an example. And somehow, they had decided that I would be their target. At first, I considered just painting it back. It would have been easier. Less stressful. But then, a memory flashed in my mind, our daughter standing proudly at the doorstep when we first painted it, saying, "It looks so happy now." That door had become part of our story. To repaint it felt like giving in. I couldn't do it. So I wrote back. My letter was polite but firm. I explained the significance of the color, noted that nothing in the CC and RS explicitly banned it, and asked for reconsideration. I even attached photos showing other homes in neighboring communities with similar shades of blue. Their reply came 3 days later, appeal denied. Fine stands. That was when the war began. Make sure you hit subscribe right now, because this story takes some unbelievable turns, and I don't want you to miss the ending. The first battle was at the HOA meeting. I walked into the stuffy room where the board sat at their long folding table, a few dozen residents scattered in the chairs. The president, Mrs. Whitaker, was a sharp-eyed woman with clipped speech, always dressed in pressed suits like she was running for office. She welcomed me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You're here about the door, I presume," she said. I stood tall. "Yes. I don't understand why it's an issue. The CC and RS don't specifically list door colors, and the city guidelines don't restrict it either. Why is blue unacceptable?" Murmurs rippled through the audience. Some neighbors tilted their heads, curious. Mrs. Whitaker pursed her lips. "The approved palette is neutral tones. Beige, gray, white, dark green. Blue does not reflect the community's uniform aesthetic." "With respect," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "uniformity is not the same as pride. This community is made of people, families. We're not supposed to all be copies of each other." A few heads nodded. But Whitaker's glare silenced them. "The rule stands," she said coldly. "Non-compliance will result in further penalties." That night, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the letter. My husband rubbed my shoulders. "We can fight this," he said. "We don't have to just roll over." The next morning, I started researching. I dug into HOA law, reading late into the night, my eyes burning. I discovered cases where HOAs had overstepped, where homeowners had won. My blue door wasn't just a door anymore. It was a test of whether ordinary people had the right to individuality in a place that claimed to celebrate community. Neighbors began stopping by quietly. One woman whispered, "I like your door. Don't let them bully you." Another told me about how she'd been fined for having a flower pot that wasn't approved. The more I listened, the more I realized this wasn't just my fight. Everyone had a story. Everyone was afraid. And suddenly, I wasn't afraid anymore. This was bigger than paint. This was about standing up when everyone else stayed quiet. The next morning I woke to the sound of gravel crunching in my driveway. When I pulled the curtain back, a white SUV with the HOA's emblem sat parked outside my home. 2 board members in pressed polo shirts stood on the sidewalk, clipboards in hand, staring directly at my front door as though it was some crime scene evidence. One of them raised a camera and snapped pictures. I opened the door and stepped onto the porch before they had the chance to scribble their notes. "Morning," I said flatly, my arms folded across my chest. They offered the kind of smile people give when they're not actually smiling. "Mr. Dawson," the taller one replied, "we're here to document your violation. The color of your door doesn't comply with community standards." I stared at them, completely baffled. The community standards? You mean the giant handbook no one reads? The one that has 30 pages on landscaping but nothing that specifically says what color a door can or can't be? The shorter man cleared his throat, flipping through a binder. "It says all exterior modifications must be approved by the board. You painted your door navy blue without permission." I almost laughed. Navy blue is a crime now. They didn't answer. They just wrote something down on their clipboards and left, muttering about deadlines and fines. My neighbors peeked from their windows as if a scandal was unfolding on my lawn. That night, at dinner, I told my wife and kids what had happened. My teenage daughter slammed her fork down. "So they can punish us for choosing a color they don't like? That's ridiculous." It was ridiculous. And the more I thought about it, the more it gnawed at me. These people weren't just fining me for the sake of rules, they were flexing power, trying to remind me and everyone else that the HOA controlled what was acceptable in the neighborhood. The next week, I received an official violation letter in the mail. Bold black print at the top read, "Final warning, non-compliant door color." The fine was $500, payable within 30 days. White right pointing backhand index. Don't forget, if stories like this make you shake your head, hit that subscribe button and like this video so we can keep bringing more HOA battles to light. When I showed the letter to my wife, she shook her head in disbelief. $500? For paint? No, I said, gripping the paper tighter, for control. I decided to attend the next HOA meeting. They always held them in the community center, a sterile room with beige walls, folding chairs, and a faint smell of stale coffee. When I walked in, I felt eyes on me, neighbors whispering, the board members stiffening in their seats. The president, a wiry man with silver hair and a voice that always sounded irritated, began the meeting with the usual droning about budgets and landscaping updates. Finally, they opened the floor for resident concerns. I stood. The room quieted. "I want to talk about the so-called violation notice for my front door." The president adjusted his glasses. "Yes, Mr. Dawson, your navy door. It's not an approved color." I raised an eyebrow. "Show me the list of approved colors." The board exchanged glances. The president coughed. "We don't have a list, per se. But the community's aesthetic has always been neutral shades. Beige, gray, white. Nothing that draws attention." I couldn't help but smirk. "So, what you're saying is, you fine me $500 for not blending in enough. For daring to be different." Some neighbors chuckled under their breath. Others shifted nervously, not wanting to be seen siding with me. The president's face flushed red. "Rules are rules. You didn't submit a request. End of discussion." But it wasn't the end for me. It was the beginning. Because in that moment, I realized this fight wasn't about a door. It was about principle. If they could punish me for navy blue, they could punish the next person for red flowers, or a wind chime, or a garden gnome. Where did it end? I walked out of that meeting with a plan forming in my head. This wasn't going to be a fine I quietly paid. This was going to be a battle. The following week, the tension in the neighborhood was palpable. It felt like every time I stepped outside, someone was watching, whispering, waiting to see if I would fold under the HOA's pressure. But instead of hiding, I decided to make my stand louder. I went to the hardware store and bought a fresh gallon of the same navy blue paint. The guy at the counter asked if I was planning a touch-up. I smiled and said, "No, I'm planning a war." That night, under the glow of the porch light, I repainted the door a deeper, richer shade of navy, deliberately making it look even bolder. Every brushstroke felt like defiance, like reclaiming the right to my own home. The very next morning, I woke to find another letter stuck to my door. This time it wasn't mailed, it had been hand-delivered. The tone was more aggressive, demanding immediate payment of the $500 fine, plus an additional $50 administrative fee. I crumpled it in my fist and tossed it into the trash. Neighbors started approaching me quietly. One woman whispered while walking her dog, "I think your door looks beautiful. Mine's been needing color too, but I'm too scared they'll come after me." Another neighbor muttered, "They fined me last year for leaving my trash cans out an extra day. I just paid it, wish I had fought like you." That's when it clicked, people were afraid. The HOA thrived on fear, on people's reluctance to stand up. If I backed down, I'd be just another notch on their belt. But if I pushed back, maybe others would see they weren't invincible. I decided to escalate. I called a local news reporter I knew covered community disputes. When I explained the situation, getting fined hundreds of dollars for painting my front door navy blue, she laughed out loud. "That's ridiculous," she said. "We'd love to cover it." The next day, a news van rolled up, camera crew in tow. The board must have seen them, because within minutes, 3 HOA members marched down the street like they were storming a castle. The president, red-faced and fuming, confronted the reporter. "This is private business," he barked. "You can't film here without authorization." The reporter calmly replied, "Actually, this is a public sidewalk, and this man has every right to share his story." The cameras stayed rolling. I stood proudly on my porch, my navy door gleaming in the background. That night, the news aired my segment, "Homeowner Faces Hefty Fine Over Door Color." The story spread fast, sparking outrage online. Comments poured in, people calling the HOA power-hungry, ridiculous, and even un-American. White right pointing backhand index. If you're shaking your head at this madness too, don't forget to subscribe and like the video, because trust me, this battle is just heating up. The fallout was immediate. At the next HOA meeting, the room was packed. Neighbors who had never attended before showed up, some clutching their own violation letters. The president tried to stick to the agenda, but voices erupted from the crowd. Why are we being fined for nonsense? Who decides these so-called rules? You can't just bully people into conformity. The board members shifted uncomfortably, clearly not expecting the rebellion. But instead of backing down, they dug their heels in. "We enforce these rules to maintain property values," the president insisted, slamming his hand on the table. "Without order, the community falls apart." I stood up and faced him. "No. You enforce them because you like control. Because you think fear is the same thing as respect. But people are tired of it. We're not your subjects, we're homeowners. We own these houses, these lawns, these doors. And we have a right to live in them without being policed for ridiculous things." The room erupted in applause. Some people booed the board outright. I could see the panic in their eyes, they were losing the grip they'd held for years. That night, I knew the board would retaliate. And they did. 2 days later, I received notice of an emergency hearing scheduled just for me. They wanted to put me on probationary status, whatever that meant, and threatened to pursue legal action if I didn't pay the fine. My wife begged me to reconsider. What if they take us to court? What if they put a loan on our house? I took her hands and looked her in the eyes. If we give in now, they'll keep doing this to everyone. Somebody has to stand up to them. Why not us? She sighed but nodded. Then we'll stand together. The night before the hearing, I sat on the porch staring at that door. It wasn't just paint anymore. It was a symbol. A symbol of choice, of freedom, of defiance. And no fine, no threat, was going to strip that away. What I didn't realize was that this fight was about to spread beyond my block, beyond my city. The navy door was about to spark a movement bigger than I had ever imagined. The emergency hearing was held in the community clubhouse, a sterile little room that smelled of coffee and old carpet. Rows of metal chairs had been set up, and by the time I walked in, most of them were full. People had come out in droves, not just neighbors, but reporters, too. The HOA president clearly hadn't expected this level of attention. His jaw tightened when he saw the cameras rolling. I took my seat at the front, my wife beside me, and listened as they started reading their so-called charges. Violation of community aesthetic standards. Failure to comply with HOA directives. Refusal to remit fines. Each line was read with exaggerated authority, as if I'd committed some kind of crime. When they finished, the president leaned forward and sneered. "Mr. Thompson, this is your last chance. Pay the fine and repaint the door, or we'll pursue legal remedies." I leaned forward too, calm but firm. "You can't fine me for the color of my own front door. There is no specific guideline in your bylaws that bans navy blue. And even if there were, it would be an overreach. I refuse to pay." Gasps rippled through the room. The board members exchanged looks, clearly frustrated that I wasn't backing down. But before they could speak, a voice from the back shouted, "He's right." It was my neighbor, the one who had whispered to me weeks before about being afraid. She stood up, shaking, but her voice grew louder. "They fined me for leaving my Christmas lights up too long. I paid it because I was scared. But I'm done being scared." Another neighbor rose. "They fined me for a garden gnome." A gnome. I didn't fight back either. "But he's right, we can't let them keep doing this to us." Suddenly, half the room was standing. People began listing their own stories of petty fines, intimidation, and threats. It was chaos, but it was beautiful chaos. For the first time, the board wasn't in control, the homeowners were. The president tried to gavel the room into silence, his face beet red. "Enough! This hearing is not for public debate." But the people ignored him. Voices overlapped, louder and angrier. "We want a vote," someone shouted. "We want new leadership." The reporters were eating it up, cameras capturing every second of the rebellion. White right pointing backhand index, and if you're watching this unfold, make sure you subscribe and like this video, because this fight is far from over, and you'll want to see what happens next. The board ended the hearing abruptly, storming out in frustration. But the damage was done. The next day, the local paper ran the headline, "Homeowners Revolt Against HOA Over Door Color Dispute." Online, the video clips went viral. People from all over the country started reaching out, strangers who had faced their own ridiculous HOA fines, sharing their stories in solidarity. I never imagined my front door would spark something so big. But with the attention came consequences. A few days later, I received a certified letter from the HOA's attorney. They were escalating the matter, threatening to place a lien on our home if we didn't pay. My wife cried when she read it. The idea that we could lose our house over a door felt surreal, almost insane. But I refused to waver. We contacted an attorney of our own. He was a sharp, no-nonsense guy who had dealt with HOA abuse cases before. After reviewing their documents, he smirked. "They don't have a leg to stand on. Their bylaws are vague, and you've already exposed their selective enforcement. If they try to sue, we'll bury them." That gave me hope, but the weeks that followed were brutal. We received anonymous letters in our mailbox calling us troublemakers and rule breakers. The board doubled down, patrolling the neighborhood, writing up more citations for other families, trying to scare them into silence. It worked on some, but not all. A group of neighbors started coming to our house regularly, talking strategy. "We should call a special election," one suggested. "Force them out." Another proposed launching a petition to change the bylaws and limit the board's power. The movement was growing, and my door had become its symbol. People started tying navy blue ribbons on their mailboxes in solidarity. One night, as I was sitting on the porch, I looked out and saw a row of houses with little navy accents, shutters, planters, even a few freshly painted doors. It nearly brought me to tears. What had started as a fight over my front door had turned into a community standing up for itself. But the board wasn't done. At the next meeting, they announced they were hiring private security to monitor violations in the neighborhood. That sent a chill down my spine. It felt less like a community and more like a dictatorship. I knew then that the next step wouldn't just be about resisting fines, it would be about dismantling their grip entirely. We weren't just fighting for a door anymore. We were fighting for freedom. The first night the so-called private security showed up, I knew things had crossed into dangerous territory. A white SUV crept slowly down our street, its headlights sweeping across porches and driveways. 2 men in uniform sat inside, one of them scribbling notes on a clipboard while the other pointed at houses. It didn't take long before they stopped in front of mine. I stood at my window and watched as they stared at my navy blue front door, writing something down. My stomach twisted. It wasn't just about intimidation anymore, they were escalating. The next morning, we received a notice claiming we were now in violation of multiple unspecified rules. They threatened daily fines of $100 until we complied. My wife's hands trembled as she held the paper. "They're trying to break us," she whispered. I hugged her and said what I barely believed myself. "They won't win. We've come too far to back down now." That evening, the neighbors gathered at our house again. The fear was palpable, but so was the determination. "They are bluffing," my attorney assured us over speakerphone. "Private security has no legal authority. They're wasting your money to scare you. If they keep this up, it's going to backfire." Still, the pressure weighed heavy. 4 days, I felt like we were living under surveillance. Every time I stepped outside, the SUV seemed to appear, circling like a vulture. My kids stopped playing in the yard. My wife kept the blinds drawn. It was suffocating. But then something happened that I'll never forget. One Saturday morning, I walked outside and saw a group of neighbors standing at the end of my driveway. Dozens of them. Each one wore something navy blue, shirts, hats, scarves. A man I barely knew raised his voice. "If they want to fine you, they'll have to fine all of us." More people joined as the day went on. By afternoon, it looked like a block party, except instead of music and food, it was solidarity. Someone even hung a giant banner across 2 trees, "Our doors, our choice." White right pointing backhand index, and hey, if you're following along with this battle, make sure you subscribe and like this video so you don't miss the final showdown. It's about to get even crazier. That public display of unity made headlines again. The local news returned, broadcasting live from our neighborhood. One reporter interviewed an elderly neighbor who said through tears, "I've lived here 30 years. I've paid my dues. And I'm tired of being treated like a criminal in my own home." The HOA president, furious about the coverage, sent out a mass email calling us agitators and threats to community harmony. But the harder he pushed, the more people pushed back. The petition for a special election gained traction, signatures flooding in faster than we expected. Still, the board tried to tighten its grip. They filed paperwork threatening to put a lien on my house if I didn't pay the mounting fines. When I showed the notice to my lawyer, he laughed again. "They are bluffing. I'll handle it. In fact, I'm going to hit them with a counterclaim for harassment and abuse of power." Hearing those words was a relief, but the stress was wearing on us. My wife admitted one night, tears in her eyes, that she just wanted it all to end. "I don't care about the door anymore," she said. "I just want peace." Her words nearly broke me, but they also fueled me. Because peace wouldn't come from surrendering, it would come from standing up and finishing the fight. The turning point came during another HOA meeting. This time, the clubhouse was packed to the walls. Neighbors stood shoulder to shoulder, reporters lined the back, and the security guards lingered outside, watching uneasily. The president began the meeting with his usual condescending tone. "This community is under attack by a few individuals who refuse to follow the rules. We must remain strong in defending our standards." That was when my lawyer, seated beside me, stood up. His voice was calm but commanding. "Mr. President, your board has overstepped its authority. You've issued baseless fines, engaged in harassment, and spent association funds on unlawful intimidation. If this continues, we will not only sue, you may be personally liable." The room erupted in murmurs. The president sputtered, "That's outrageous." But before he could finish, another neighbor shouted, "We want new leadership." Another voice followed. "We want accountability." Soon the room was chanting in unison. "Vote! Vote! Vote! The board members looked shaken. For the first time, they weren't the ones controlling the narrative. They looked like what they really were, a handful of bullies who had underestimated the power of the community. That night, we knew we had shifted the balance. The petition had enough signatures for a recall election, and the board could feel their reins slipping away. The navy blue door wasn't just my fight anymore, it had become a movement. But the battle wasn't over yet. The final showdown was coming, and the board wasn't about to go down quietly. Election day came faster than anyone expected. The petition had forced the HOA's hand, and the recall vote was set for a Tuesday evening in the community clubhouse. For weeks, the tension built like a storm. Flyers circulated, rumors spread, and the president's allies went door to door trying to scare people into voting against the recall. They said things like, if the board falls, the neighborhood will collapse, or property values will plummet without strong leadership. But their words didn't carry the same weight anymore. People had seen too much. They'd watched the SUV circle like a predator, they'd seen neighbors fined for trivial nonsense, and they'd witnessed the pettiness that turned into intimidation. And above all, they'd seen one blue door become a symbol of resistance. The night of the vote, the clubhouse parking lot overflowed. Cars lined the streets, people walked from blocks away, and news vans parked on the corner, their satellite dishes pointed skyward. Inside, the room buzzed with energy. Some wore navy blue clothing, others carried handmade signs. My wife clutched my hand tightly, her eyes glistening. No matter what happens tonight, she whispered, you stood up for all of us. The board members sat stiffly at the front of the room, papers stacked neatly in front of them. The president tried to project authority, but his face was pale and his hands trembled when he adjusted his glasses. The vote began. Each homeowner signed in, received a ballot, and slipped it into the box. It took nearly an hour for everyone to cast their votes. During that time, the tension was unbearable. The board avoided eye contact with the crowd, whispering to one another, while neighbors chatted nervously or stared at the floor. When the last ballot was dropped into the box, silence fell. The secretary began the count out loud. Yes, no, yes. Every yes echoed like a drumbeat in the room. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might give out. Halfway through the stack, the pattern was clear. The yes votes, votes to recall, were overwhelming. People began smiling, whispering, even chuckling nervously as the numbers mounted. The president's face turned red, then white, then gray. By the end, the tally was undeniable. The board was recalled. Over 70% had voted against them. The room erupted in cheers. Neighbors hugged, clapped, some even cried. A woman near the front shouted, "We're free." Others chanted, "New board! New board!" The president slammed his gavel down, his voice breaking. "This is outrageous! You'll regret this!" But his words were swallowed by the roar of the crowd. His reign was over. For the first time, I felt the weight lift off my chest. My door was still navy blue, my family was still in our home, and we had won, not just for us, but for everyone. The following weeks were transformative. A new board was elected, made up of neighbors who actually listened, people who wanted to build community instead of control it. One of their first actions was to repeal the ridiculous approved colors rule entirely. People repainted their doors every shade imaginable: burgundy, forest green, golden yellow, even bright red. It was as if the neighborhood had taken a deep breath and finally exhaled. But more than the paint, it was the unity that stuck. The cookouts returned, kids laughed in the cul-de-sacs again, and people waved to each other without fear. My wife, who had once begged me to give up, admitted one evening, "You were right not to back down. We didn't just save our door, we saved our neighborhood." White right pointing backhand index. And if you've been inspired by this story, don't forget to subscribe and like this video, because I've got more real stories of standing up to HOA abuse that you don't want to miss. Months later, I was walking down the street when I noticed something surprising. The former president's house, once pristine and rule-perfect, now had peeling shutters and a brown lawn. He rarely came outside anymore. The power he once held over us was gone, and the community moved forward without him. My navy blue door still stood proudly at the front of my house, the same door that had nearly cost us everything but ended up giving us so much more. Every time I looked at it, I saw more than just wood and paint. I saw resilience, solidarity, and victory. The battle had been long and painful, filled with moments of doubt and fear, but in the end, it proved something simple and powerful. When people stand together, no board, no bully, no so-called authority can silence them. And as I closed my door one quiet evening, the sun dipping behind the houses, I realized something. It wasn't just my door that had become a symbol, it was our whole community. We had faced intimidation, harassment, and fear, but we had reclaimed our homes, our voices, and our pride. And that, more than anything, was the victory worth fighting for.